Hello everybody and welcome to Revit Pure Live. I am your host, Nicolas Catelier. I am an architect, a BIM specialist, and the founder of Revit Pure. Revit Pure Live is a show where we help you become a better Revit user or a better BIM user as well. We explore other software sometimes. Already I can look at the chat and see people from all around the world, including Ryan from Jacksonville, Elect from New Zealand, Robin from North Carolina, California, Viviana from Argentina, Priscilla from Montreal. Keep saying where you're from. Always interesting to hear where people are watching. Before moving on with today's guest, a couple of things to mention. First, thanks to our sponsor, AVAIL. AVAIL is a content management platform for Revit and other software. You can share libraries with multiple users, not only for loadable families, but for other components such as images, system families, URL, PDF, links, videos, anything really. And AVAIL has an amazing feature for Revit called Harvest. And what this does, you can select a Revit project, you click on OK, and then you select what you want to harvest from the model to bring into your AVAIL library. You can select groups, schedules, sheets, families, typical details, loadable families, and system families, and then they are part of the AVAIL browser. You can drag and drop them into any project that all your users can access. So not only you have access to loadable families, but also system families, such as Revit walls and Revit ceilings and roofs and so on. In addition to that, you can also include detailing. If you have a library of typical details, you can include them in your AVAIL channels where you can drag and drop to a project. There are integrations with additional software such as AutoCAD, Rhino, 3D Studio. So it's not only for Revit, you can use it for any AC software you're using. There is metadata control. If you want advanced filtering and sorting, you can use Excel to add specific information to the content, and then more easily sort. You can click on the tag to easily find the content you're looking for, and all the content inside AVAIL can be placed on different channels, different libraries, you might say. So get more information at getavail.com. And you can also go to the link included in this video, which is resources.getavail.com/RevitPure, or just use the link in the video description. And they do have a special offer for you if you want to try it out. So, because most of my clients are struggling with managing their content. Where do they keep the families? Where do they keep the system families? The detailing, it's often quite a mess. So if that's the case for you, check out AVAIL, and thanks to AVAIL for sponsoring Revit Pure Live. Something else that I wanted to mention before moving on with the guests, the Revit Pure Pro template. I've been working on creating the best possible Revit standards for more than 10 years now, starting when I was an architect and BIM manager at a firm here in Quebec City, and I was struggling to find the right information. And along the years, I started creating norms, and I found great way to create schedules and project browser organization, and that culminated into the Pro template, which you can buy right here at revitpure.com/Pro template. And this is the Pro template I use with all my clients whenever they need a new template. I use this as the base and then customize it to match their need. It includes a very well organized project browser. It includes a pre-made schedules, just like this, door schedule, furniture schedules, working schedule as well, a clear and simple view templates organization, a bunch of view filters to make sure that what you see inside your views makes sense and is optimized for all different kind of views. There are some typical tree families. Anyway, and you can download the full template guide at revitpure.com/Pro template. All right. Meanwhile, I was talking about that. We've got Mark from Seattle, Kenny from Arkansas, somebody from Ontario, Bert from Huntington Beach, California. We've got somebody from Lampung, Indonesia. All around the world. That's Cool. So give me a minute here. So today's guest is Brenton Wiberg. Brenton is currently based in Salt Lake City. He has graduated from the Brigham Young University in 2010 with a bachelor in science in construction management, and has an MBA from the Western Governors University in 2015. He is a part-time adjunct professor at the Salt Lake Community College since this year, where he teaches Revit for interior design. He is the owner of the website RevitFamily.biz. He also has his own firm called Wiberg Architectural Consulting since 2016 and has many other ventures. He is an entrepreneur. So welcome to the show, Brenton. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming to the show. I usually start the show with asking the same question to all guests, which is, how did you get interested in BIM?
Ooh. It kind of fell in my lap, honestly. I knew I wanted to be an architect since I was like 2,
Mm-hmm.
and I've been drawing houses since like 5. And when I graduated college, I was looking for an intern, or before I graduated college, I was looking for an internship. And it just so happened the architectural firm I fell into was using Revit, and it's history from there. I loved it.
Yeah, so you got good at Revit quickly,
Yeah.
and you became a BIM nerd. Yeah, that's similar to me, I guess.
Yeah.
Sounds good. And how did you get interested specifically in Revit families?
Oh, oh man, I'm trying to think exactly how it
Mm-hmm.
piqued my interest. I think it was, I think I was just trying to design my own project one day, and I hated all the crap that I was finding online. And I just wanted it to look a certain way. And so I was sick of letting other people define what goes into my project. So I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I can do this. And so I took a crack at learning how to do families. And of all the things in Revit you can do, families are literally my favorite thing. It's a great balance between like modeling, problem solving, a little bit of math, geometry, even. I find them like a good amount of challenging. So.
Interesting. And yeah, so did you were you trying to download families from the internet and you were not satisfied with what you were getting?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Revit City, I think, was the major thing.
Yeah,
Wait, like
yeah.
10 years ago, or I think it's
Mm-hmm.
even 15 years ago, that was about the only resource you had was Revit City.
Yeah, I remember that there was Autodesk Seek, which can stop existing at some point as
Yeah,
well.
that was like a blip later on, and then it was non-existent. Yeah, all of those. I've been
Yeah,
through them
sure.
all. Yeah.
All right. So I think people are looking forward to get into families. So now we can see your screen. So is there something specific you wanted us to get started?
Okay. Well, so if you read the synopsis for this episode, we're going to be covering a lot of things. So I'm going to try to speed through these, but hopefully still give you enough information. So I think what I was going to do, or what my plan is we're going to, for the first half, we're going to look at this family that I have open now, which is just a base cabinet with shelves. And the reason I chose this is because it's going to allow me to kind of demonstrate some um, formula principles, and it'll also let me kind of give you some tips and tricks for using the user interface. So we'll kind of mix all of that in as we try to we're going to specifically make these adjustable shelves. So just so you know what the end product is hopefully going to be is this. And the thing that is particularly complicated or unique about this is just the flexibility of the shelves. So if you look at it right now, there's 2 shelves in there, but we could put in 5, or we could change it to 1, or we could put it to 0, and it just populates itself. So I'm illustrating the principles I'm going to teach today through these shelves, but these can be applied to a ton of different things. In my families, I use them for drawers. Anything that you want to repeat, will be great. You can use it with louvers, or I'm trying to think of some other examples. I use it all the time. So
Hmm.
it's a pretty valuable principle. And along the way, we'll dive into some more complicated functions or, formulas in Revit.
Yeah, so you're going to be talking about arrays.
Yeah, we'll talk
Yeah,
a
that
little
should
bit
be
about
fun. I just came from AU, and arrays were part of my talk. I use them for brick patterns, actually.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah,
Yeah,
looking
arrays can
forward to
be
it.
tricky. And
They
when you're
are, yeah.
new, because even just to do an array,
Hmm.
you've got to know about nesting and then formulas. It's
Hmm.
just
Sure. All
so
right.
let's
Yeah,
with
I'll keep
that
track
said, we'll maybe
of the
crack it open.
questions. I'll keep track of
Okay.
the questions, and if some a good one pops up, I'll let you know. But meanwhile, I'll let you jump in.
Okay, awesome. So before we get too far into it, let's just look at some user interface items. So when you're in the Revit family interface, things change up a little bit. A lot of it looks the same as normal Revit, but you've got a couple options down here, and then some things people don't know about. I think a couple of the things I'm going to show you, I didn't discover till probably I watched Paul Oben on lynda.com, and he kind of taught these. And so I figured if it took me that long to figure it out, maybe I should just share it for anyone who's new. So one of the things when you do Revit families is I think people think a lot of your time is spent modeling and making parameters, which part of it is that, but the most time I spend on a parametric family is troubleshooting the thing to try to get it to work. And so one of the things that's helpful when you're troubleshooting is you have to be able to know what constraints are on the model at any given moment. Otherwise, you can't understand why it's behaving the way it is or why it's erroring out or breaking. So I'm just going to go through a couple ways to see some of the parameters. So my first is, I'm just going to look at the back view. And if you look from the back view, you can see I can clearly see some of the parameters that have been assigned. So here are the constraints, but like I can see there's a middle line here that it looks like it's going to center inside the box, but I don't know that for sure. I can't see the constraint. Like if I change the height to 3.5 feet and click OK, I can see that it's adjusting, but I don't know how it's adjusting. Like where is that constraint? So I know it must be there, but I can't see it. So if you come down here to the reveal constraints command, it's got a little lock on it and a dimension, and you click it, it will show you some of the constraints that are in other views, but that are not showing necessarily in the view you're in. So that will help when you're trying to troubleshoot a problem. I've used it many times to help me try to figure out what's going on. This is especially useful if you're not a person who creates families, but maybe you download them from Revit City, but you want to make adjustments. You have to first, in order to adjust it, you have to understand what the person did who created it. And so this is one of the ways to help with that. Another thing, and I think I'll show you the next one while we're building a family, because it's not going to be so obvious in this example, because I've already constrained it. But you can show the assumed constraints that Revit automatically makes without you giving it any input. And I'll show you an example of that a little later. And then another thing, this isn't so much a trick or anything, it's just I, for years, for some reason, didn't even think to change the scale of the views, but it drives me nuts that when you start to get a lot of constraints in a window, they get big and they get in your way. And when you try to adjust stuff, you can't quite tell what you're clicking sometimes. So I often change the scale of my view so that the names of the parameters are more manageable. I think that's I know it sounds kind of like a lame trick or tip, but I didn't even think about doing that for years. And I would just like be stressed out by all of these
Yeah, on some
editors.
families where there are lots of parameters, it's like kind of a must, especially if the geometry is small. You can see
Yeah, like,
anything
yeah,
sometimes, right?
when I do my little hardware families, you
Hmm.
can't, it's impossible if you don't change the
Sure,
scale.
yeah.
So don't forget the scale still works in the Revit family environment. All right, another thing that causes people a lot of problems if we're talking about like trying to avoid problems later down the road is when they pick their template. So we're going to now we'll move into actually starting the adjustable shelves like I'm showing here. I'm just going to close out of the example and we'll just start a new family from scratch. So what we're going to be creating is the actual shelf that we're going to put into. So I'm not going to show you how to make the base. I could, but I think I would eat up 1 hour on just the base. So I'm just going to assume everyone can kind of get here with a base. It's pretty standard as far as family goes. So we'll start with that, and then we're going to add shelves into it. So first we're going to make the shelf. So I'm just going to open a new family. And I'm in the United States, so I use English Imperial. And then this is the debate that everyone has to go through, is what to pick as your template file. And if you've taken any courses on Revit family making, you know this is a big deal. I personally, 90% of the time, will start with a generic model. Because if you start with other things, you might have constraints that you can't undo down the road. Whereas a generic model, it's like the T cell, is it a T cell? of Revit families. It can change into anything later. So that's where I start, is the generic model. Or I will start with a generic face-based model sometimes if the situation warrants it. I don't ever select a ceiling, floor, or roof, anything specific, because a face base can also host to a ceiling, a floor, and a wall, but you're not constrained. So if you have to have it hosted to a face, I don't pick a specific item. I just pick the generic face base. So that's what we're going to start with.
Do you typically use face-based families a lot? I'm curious about that, because I know that I used to use them quite a lot, but I've realized with groups, model groups, it don't work quite well. Like if you copy and paste the group over multiple levels, the face-based families might start to have weird behavior.
I have noticed that every once in a while there is an odd behavior. I use them, I would say sparingly, but if you use them, they do solve a lot of problems. And they really are good for when you're trying to put something on a face that could be, in any orientation, because hosting something to a face in any orientation is hard if it's not a face-based family. It usually breaks the family.
That's right.
So for this instance, I am going to use a generic model face-based, because the shelves are going to be planted onto that cabinet box. So I'm going to start there. And when you get into a face-based family, you're looking directly down at the face. So you're normally used to looking down at the floor. This is kind of the same view. So here's our face, and this is where it's going to be hosted. So then the front view, you can see the face down here that it's going to be hosted to, and then we'll build above that. And in this case, I'm actually going to build below that. And here's why. So when you're setting it up, it's good to think about how you're going to use the family. So if I jump back to my box, what I'm trying to do is build a shelf that when I place it, it kind of puts it in the right spot without me having to think too much about it. So I'm gonna probably base the shelf on the face of this cabinet. The other option would be to do it to the back of the cabinet. And I think either one's fine. I'm just going to choose to do it to the front. So let's jump back in. So the first thing you do, another tip before you start anything, if you're going to make something parametric, build a reference plane frame for it first before you do any modeling. I think most people, the first instinct is to hurry and get the thing modeled that they want, and then try to figure out how to constrain it. I don't do any of that. I don't do any modeling until I know that the frame is going to work.
So, yeah, there was a good tip that I had. I think it's from Steve Stafford. That says the reference planes are like the bones, the parameters are like the muscle, and the geometry is like the skin. I think it's a pretty good metaphor when trying to explain families.
I like that. That's a very good metaphor. Okay, so I'm gonna just hurry and set up the frame. So the way I described it just now is the face we're hosting to is the face of the cabinet. So when we go into here and think about how we're going to model it, you got to reorient a little bit. So the front, if I went to the front view, that's actually going to be the bottom of the shelf. And if I go to the reference level, that's going to be the front edge of the shelf. Okay, which isn't necessarily intuitive if you're used to looking at the cabinet this way. You would assume that the front view would be the thin part of the shelf. And if that doesn't make sense yet, it will as we go by. So I'm just building the width and the height parameter or reference planes. In fact, so I'll do that real quick, and then I'm going to constrain them. I want the shelf to flex or move. When we adjust the depth, I want it to move evenly across the center line. So that's why I do the equal parameter. And then we'll hurry and put in the shelf thickness parameter right here, and we're going to name it. We'll make it a type parameter. Okay. And then we'll do the same thing with the width. Oops. Okay, so now we've kind of got our framework. Once I do that, I like to flex it. So we'll just open up the parameters now. You can see the new parameters we just created. So I'm just going to do 3/4 of an inch for the thickness, and the width, let's just make it 2 inches, and click OK. And now things got real small, but it worked. So nothing busted, no errors, and the frame moved the way I thought it would. So already I know that the parameters work. I know that the reference planes are working. If something breaks after this, it's something that I did when I was constraining geometry. So it just helps us troubleshoot later down the road. So I'm going to also go to the front view, and I'm going to do the depth of the shelf. And like I said, I'm going to do it below the face because I'm going to host this shelf to the front of the cabinet and not the back. So here's the reference plane there. And we'll just assign it the depth parameter. And then we'll flex it just to make sure. Say 2 feet. Click OK. All right, so that moved and it was fine, no errors. So now I'm going to move into geometry really quickly. We'll just do an extrusion. And here's another great thing about doing the frames first is when you go to make the geometry. So I'm just going to do a rectangle. When I click off, it immediately recognizes that there's reference planes underneath, and it gives me the option to lock these right now. And it saves 4 aligning commands. If you didn't have the reference plane already there, if you had already modeled this, then made the reference planes, then came back and edited the sketch, you'd have to realign it 4 times. So if you just want to be a little more efficient.
Yeah, and I think isn't there the auto lock now in Revit 2023 as well?
Oh, don't even tell me. I have been, if that's true, I need to know about it. I have been working in 2017 because I make my families for my website. So I have to go way back. So I don't know a lot of the new features. If I'm being honest. So
it's a recent one for sure.
Okay, so now we just need to constrain the depth. And I'm just going to pull this down to the line, to the reference plane. And it didn't give me the option to lock. So sometimes when you pull it down, it'll ask you to, it'll give you the lock thing, but it's not doing that. So I'm going to align it manually and click and then lock it. And I think that's really it. We've built our shelf and it looks stupid right now. It doesn't look like it makes any sense, but it will in a sec. So the next thing I'm going to do is save this. I'll just put it on my desktop. And then I'm going to load it into that base cabinet. Okay, so now you can see it. It's floating there and it's in the same orientation that we just saw it in, but we're gonna go up here and hit place on face. And I'm just gonna place it on the face and hit spacebar so that it rotates. And now it's hosted. Okay, so this concept of what I just did, loading one family into another, is called nesting a family. And if you're going to array something in a family, you're almost always going to have to do a nesting situation. So that's the principle there. Okay, before I keep going, any major questions we need to take a break for?
Yeah, there's a question from a track lover that asks, I've heard that some say that in order in which you place dimensions, the reference planes matter. Have you found that to be true?
The order in which you place dimension. Oh, wait, say that. The order in which you place dimensions, the reference planes matter?
Yeah. Have you heard anything about that?
Hmm.
I don't, unless it's constraining the same elements. That would be the only thing.
Yeah, I can't think of an instance where that's
Hmm.
true. It could be true if you're being sloppy, because if you are placing your dimensions in a certain order, Revit Revit will make its own judgments and it will assume certain constraints that you don't give it. So it could be a problem if you left some pieces of geometry unconstrained. Revit will assume things, and it will assume different things probably depending on the order that you dimension things. So I could see where that would be true. But if you are truly understanding what you're doing and you don't leave any constraints undefined, then I don't think it would matter. That's my off the cuff guess.
Yeah, sure. I haven't heard a major problem with that. I think if the family is well modeled and well constrained, you shouldn't run into any issues like that.
Yeah.
Robert says that it might depend on strong references.
Oh yeah,
Good point.
that is a whole nother topic.
Yeah.
But it is important.
Okay. We can get into it later, maybe. And John asks, can you have a variety of shelf spacing that can be stipulated per shelf? I think you're going to talk about spacing in arrays, right? So maybe we can get into that after.
Yeah. Yes, that's like one level deeper than what I planned on talking about
Okay,
today.
okay.
But I feel like you could definitely do that.
Okay.
All right, so let's just work on constraining our new family inside this family. So generally speaking, let's just say for the sake of this family, we want it to be centered in the cabinet. So I'm just going to, and we've already got this reference plane, right? We've already built the frame for this in the base cabinet. This stays centered no matter how tall. So it's a safe item to constrain our shelf to. So I'm just going to hit align and then I'm going to lock it. So now it should be constrained exactly where we want it vertically. Now let's constrain it horizontally. So we'll pick the center line. So here's another thing. Make sure when you're picking what you're aligning to that you're not sloppy. Like by default, this is trying to pick, well, maybe it's picking the right thing. I like to make sure I see that it's the reference plane. Because sometimes when you're aligning to like an edge, you could end up aligning something to the edge of the shelf or the cabinet rather than the reference plane. So I'm pretty adamant that I make sure I pick the reference plane. And then same with the model. I try not to constrain model elements to model elements. I try to constrain reference planes to reference planes. And it just comes from years and years of problem solving. And a lot of my hardest problems to solve came down to just the simple fact that geometry does not host or align well to other geometry. A lot of the time it will work fine, but that instance where you can't figure out what's going wrong in your family because you think you did everything right, it usually boils down to what you selected before you aligned the geometry. So I stick with reference planes. And then even inside this, I make sure you can see in the pop-up that it says it's the reference plane. So then I click OK. and then I lock it. Okay, so now the shelf is constrained left to right, up and down. Now back to front is the only other degree of freedom we have to worry about locking up. But that's already taken care of for us because it's hosted to the front of the cabinet. So we don't have to align it to anything forward and backwards. It'll move with the surface of the cabinet. And I guess this is another thing to bring up. Technically, I would also suggest that you don't host a face-based family to the face of geometry. In this particular instance, I think it's fine because I'm not trying to change the geometry it's hosted to. But like when I get in some of my other families where you can change the door panel style and you can also change the hardware is would be hosted to that panel. And when you change it out, it breaks the hardware. So I actually make reference planes, and I host the hardware to a reference plane, and I host the door also to a reference plane that is in alignment with each other. So that's just something I just thought I'd mention that because that has also caused me grief in the past.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's one of the gold rules, and one of the bad signs of a family when geometry are constrained with geometry like that.
Yeah.
That's might not be an expert that has created that family, right?
Yeah. Okay. So now what's happening is we got to get it to the right width, depth, and height. I think the thickness is fine of the shelf. And we can do this a couple ways. We can write an equation that will figure it out based on the cabinet, which is what I would suggest to do now, because the end user does not want to try to do math to try to figure out what its actual dimensions should be. It should just be automatic. But before we do that, I'm going to go back and I'm going to flex what we just did to make sure I didn't miss anything. I flex my models pretty often after I've just made when I've made constraints to parameters, just because it's better to find a problem early than to flex at the end and realize there's like 3 problems that you have to solve and you don't know quite where they're coming from. So I'm just going to flex the height to 3.5 feet and the width to 2 feet, and then the depth I'll do 2.5 feet. So I'm just going to flex in all directions, and it doesn't look like there's any problems other than the actual dimensions of the shelf are still wrong, but it moved how I would assume it should move up to this point. Okay, so with nested families, they act like families that have been put into projects. So if I click on the nested family and I look over here in the properties panel, you can see that it's a shelf family. And if I had any instance parameters, they would be here. And I can edit by clicking the edit type, I can edit the type parameters. So right now, you can see the depth and the thickness and the width parameters, which I made before. And I'm actually a little confused at why they're grayed out. They shouldn't be grayed out. Let me look at what we did here.
Did you make it as a shared family?
It's because I put the when I was entering the parameters, I put them in the formula section rather than.
There you go.
Okay. That'll fix it. So we'll reload it. Okay, so now when I click and edit them, you can see you can change them. So the problem with you changing them here is you're changing them in the family, but when the user tries to change them in the project environment, they're not going to be able to see the nested families parameters. You have to connect the nested families parameters to the actual host families parameters. So if you have made a family before, you know you can find the family that you're working in, its parameters that are available in the project once it's loaded is up here in this dialog box. It's called the family types dialog. And you click it and it shows all of my parameters that I have in here. And you could see when we just changed the width, let's change it to 3. you can see it's not feeding the width to the shelf. So we got to figure out how to feed it to the shelf. So if you just come here, click the shelf, edit its type, the first thing we'll tackle is let's just do width. So I can change the width manually, but like I said, that's not the right way to do it because the user can't use it in the project, can't change it in the project. So there's this little, I don't know, this little box that's kind of a button right here. You click that, and now you can link it to an existing parameter, or you can make a new one. So if we tied it to the width, it'll now adjust the width, but the problem is it's not doing what I think we would want it to do. It's going to the actual width of the cabinet. It's matching this width up here. So I think we need to make a new parameter and control it with an equation. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to unassign it from width, and we're going to make a new parameter called shelf width. And I like to place these in the other section because this isn't something I want the user to mess with. It's just going to be controlled by a formula. So I hide it in the other category and I click OK.
Because it's in the alphabetical order, so it's going to be below. Is that the reason?
Yeah.
Okay,
For some reason, the other category is at the bottom,
sure.
so that's where I stick them.
Uh-huh.
We're going to do the same thing, same principle with thickness. We'll just name it shelf thickness. Now, this is something that the end user can adjust. So I'm going to actually leave it with dimensions. And click OK, and then I'm going to assign the depth. I'm going to make a new parameter, shelf depth, and we'll call it, whoops, I forgot to categorize it in other, so we'll change that in a second. So we've made all of the new parameters and we've assigned them, and we're going to click OK. So now we're going to go into the family types dialog box, and now we can see the families we made, or the parameters we made. So there's shelf width down in the other category, and in the dimensions category, we got shelf thickness and shelf depth. And shelf depth, I want to move. So I'm going to hit the edit pencil, and I'm going to change it to other, and it'll move it down to the other category. So shelf thickness is something that the user can just input directly, and that's fine. So I'm just going to move it down because I don't think it's the most important thing. I'm going to maybe put it before the toe kick. Everyone has a different way they organize their parameters. I do it by what the user is most likely going to change the most. Mm-hmm. Some people do it alphabetical. I do it my way. You do it your way.
Yeah. How long have we been able to move the order of the parameter? Has that been for a while, or? It's
been a little while because I can do it in 2017, and that's
okay. So yeah, it's been a while. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So this is where formulas start to come in, and if you've worked in Excel, it's the same format as Excel. So if you go to my website, I have a free download that's called the Revit Family Cheat Sheet. It gives you all of the different functions that you can input into the families. So we're going to do a couple of them today. And you just input it like Excel. So if you have any questions of the syntax is right here. The description is here, and then like a more detailed description is here. So that's what we're going to do. So the shelf depth, we're just going to start with the cabinet depth. So we have what the user inputs as it's 2.5 feet. So we're going to pull that, and you have to use the exact name of this parameter, and it's case sensitive. So we're going to start with depth. And then the depth of the shelf isn't going to equal the depth of the cabinet. If you probably don't know this, I made the cabinet, so I know that the back of the cabinet is 3/4 of an inch. So we're going to subtract 3/4 of an inch from the depth. And it will then calculate the actual shelf depth, and then it will send it to that nested family. So same thing with the width. We'll start with width. Yep. And then we're going to subtract. Now the sides of the cabinets are each 3/4 of an inch. So we have to times it by 2. So it's going to be 1.5 inches. And when we click OK, oh, okay, this is a good error. We'll troubleshoot this together.
Yeah, I
This
get
is a
this one a
really
lot
common
too.
error.
Pretty common, yeah.
Okay, so instance parameters can't be used in type parameter formulas. And it's saying the type parameter shelf width is driven by an instance parameter width. So it's just saying up here, the width is an instance parameter. And we probably don't want to get into the difference between type and instance right now, or this is a hot debate on when to use which one. For my cabinet, the width happens to be an instance parameter. So in order to solve that, they just need to agree with each other. So I just need to change the width, the shelf width, to also be an instance parameter. So we'll just hit the edit pencil, change it to instance, and now they agree with each other, and now I should hit OK and it's fine. So you can see it adjusted now to the inside of the cabinet. And then if we look at the depth is now the full depth of the cabinet, but it's not running through the cabinet. And just to prove that we're doing good, we'll flex the cabinet. So we'll put it back to 2, the height will be 3, the depth will be 2, and click OK. And now the shelf is adjusting. Man, I'm looking at the time. It's 4. We're already.
Yeah, it always flies like this. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering. I think I'll show you how to do arrays. We won't go too in depth because I'll get to that. I'll show you what we didn't cover just so that you at least know.
All right, I'll let you go, and then maybe in like 10-15 minutes we can start taking some questions.
Okay. Yeah, that's great.
Go ahead.
Okay. So this is great if we just want a single shelf and we want it to just always be in the center. But if we want multiple, the ability for the user to change the amount of shelves, we need to do some more work. So I'm just going to go to the front view. And we're going to use the array command. So for now, I'm just going to duplicate the shelf. We're not going to think about the center one anymore. We'll just pretend like it doesn't exist. And I'm just going to move this around. I like to move things that have not been constrained into a ridiculous position because it lets me know that I haven't constrained it yet.
Yeah, I do the same thing.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So just as a basic, let's just array it. And okay, so I hit the array command, and you get these new options. And what we select here makes a difference on how we're going to constrain it. So I'm going to do a linear array, and we don't really care about the number, but I'm going to put 3 in for now. And then it's asking you to move the base to where the end of the array is, or to move it to the position of the second item in the array. So which do you want to do? I want to move it to the last position. So I'm just going to click up and move, and now it distributes evenly the number of items I put here. It distributes evenly between the first and the last. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I'll escape out of that, and now we've got our array. So now I'm going to start constraining it, but before I constrain it, I want to build my framework. So just to try to illustrate my point, the only things we can constrain these two right now are like the top of the shelf or the top of the cabinet and the bottom of this cabinet. And that's not what we want, right? We don't want a shelf there and a shelf there and then distribute evenly in between. We want it to probably start, there needs to be some sort of spacing to begin with and to end with. So I'm going to draw my reference planes really quickly there. And these are just going to be my start and end points for my array. And then I'll set a dimension that's eventually going to be turned into a parameter. In fact, we can do that now. I'm going to want them to be the same. And in the case of the question that was asked, if you wanted to be different, this is where maybe you'd go down a different path. But I'm just going to assume we want all the spacing even. Okay, so we're going to assign a parameter, and this is going to be automatically calculated. So I'm just going to say shelf end space. And we're going to hide it in the other category and click OK. And we'll worry about what that needs to be later. We'll take care of it with an equation and some math. But for now, we know we just need to constrain our first and last part of the array to these reference planes. So I'm going to align it to the centers. Oh, and see, I'm going to move this just to make sure I do it right. Move it out of the way. Then lock. And then on the center of the cabinet, we're going to do the same thing. Okay, and now it's telling me that little error that I just clicked through is telling me we have geometry in the same place in the middle shelf. So I'm going to tab select. I'm just going to delete that for now. Oh, I might have grabbed the wrong thing. Okay. But let's change this to 4 so it's really easy to see the center one. I'm just going to get rid of that for us. Okay, so now you can see if you click on the array, you get this little bracket, and you can go back and change the number. So we can go to anything. Okay, so that's what we want the user to be able to change, is that number, so that it affects the array. So if you click on that bracket, for some reason it's in a different spot than where you're used to assigning parameters. Normally it's kind of in the ribbon. This is right here where it says label, and you do a drop down, and you can either add a parameter or pick a parameter. And I actually somehow have already made this parameter. It's because when I was prepping for this, I made it, but so I'm just assigning it to the shelf parameter. And if you open this up, you can see there's the shelf parameter. There's 2.
And you put that in graphics. Is that what you typically do with arrays?
Oh yeah, sorry. So I only use 3 categories for my parameters. If I want a user across all of the families I make, it either goes in dimensions because it's a dimension, or it goes in materials because it's a material, and then everything else pretty much goes in graphics if I want the user to use it. Because those are they're all by each other, they're towards the top, and then like I said, I hide down at the bottom, I hide the stuff I don't want the user messing with. Okay, so let's just test it. So if I put 5 in here and hit apply, you can see it made 5 shelves. If I do 3, it'll take it back to 3. So we're feeling pretty good about this. The only problem now is because we put this parameter here, it keeps a constant distance from the top and the bottom of the cabinet, which may not be what you want. So I'm just going to say, let's have it auto calculate so that it spaces it nicely. So this takes us back to some equations. So let's go into our parameters dialog box and look up our parameter that we made. It's called shelf end space. And right now it's just an arbitrary value. We can make it anything. If I want to make it 6 inches, I can. And then hit apply, and you see it moves. So probably what we want is, well, let's start with the height of the cabinet. So let's plug in the height. Let's feed it in here. So height. And then we want to take the toe kick out of the height, right? Toe kick right now equals 4 inches, but it's parametric. So we're going to subtract the toe kick from the height. So we'll type it out, toe kick height. And then, okay, so now what's left is the exact space of this box. Now we just need to divide it up evenly. So if we have 1, 2, 3 shelves, there's actually 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. So we're going to divide the height by the number of shelves, so that the user inputs. So we're going to put in number of shelves plus 1. because there's one more space than there is shelves. And then it's going to divide that height that we came up with by that number. So we're going to click apply. Oh, and I did it again. So it's the I don't learn. So it's that same instance parameter error from before. So I need to change this to an instance parameter and click OK. Oh, okay. What did it just do? That is not what I was expecting. So we're going to get some live troubleshooting.
Yeah, that's live demo for you.
Yeah, what did it do?
Arrays of strange behavior. That happens a lot.
Yeah, okay. So let's just look at what we did here. It's saying the shelf end space is 2 feet 11 inches. So I've done something wrong because there's no way.
Maybe is it the order? Like you should need
Yeah.
parentheses between. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do
Math
that.
101. Just kidding.
Okay, yeah. So now you can see it calculates 8 inches, which seems more correct. So there we go. Okay, so now if we did it right, this is good. You need to know how to troubleshoot, right? Most of your family making experience will be troubleshooting. So let's change the height to 4-foot high cabinet. And there we go. It's distributing our shelves evenly. And now we can change it to 5. We can change it to 2. And it's working. So there we go. The part that I think we don't have time for is to show you how to cover the instances where the user wants 1 shelf or 0 shelves. Because for an array to work, you have to have 2 or greater, because it doesn't know what to do if you tell it to put 1 in. It breaks it. Yeah, so you have to do some extra work in order for that functionality. So right now, the user gets the option between 2 and infinity in theory. Although that would also break it. So
yeah, what the end user would need to do is add an if statement that says if the height would be so small that there would be 1 or less than 1 array, well, instead don't show it and show something else instead. Yeah. So it's using if statements and a few tricks with visibility parameters.
We could go real deep into it. So I'm willing to show it if you wanted to go, but we can also cut it off there. I'm also happy to show it at a separate time, and we could look at it.
Sure. I think we could take a few questions.
Okay.
All right. Let's have a look at the chat. Yeah, Robert, that was from early on. Remember when we, Brian Fitzgerald says regarding the reference, the dimension on the reference, says the first reference plane you pick with the dimensions is the master. So I'm not sure what that means. I would have to try it. I'm pretty curious about that. Okay. So thanks, Brian, for that shout out. It might be the which, if you change the dimension, which will be kind of the main reference planes, which one moves and which one stays put.
Oh, yeah. But technically one of those should be pinned. Yeah. And it wouldn't matter which one you pick first.
And if you have to unpin reference plane, what happens in this case?
Explain it. Is that what you said?
If you have 2 reference planes that are not pinned and you modify dimension, what happens in this case?
Yeah, we could look at it real quick.
Yeah, real live testing during the live.
Yeah, let's just look at. Okay, so we have 2 reference planes and they are just floating in space. And if I put a parameter in between,
you would have to place a parameter, to be able to change.
I'm just gonna call it X. And now, if we take a look at X and I change it to 1 foot and hit apply, it's just completely arbitrary which one it moves, because why it would move one over the other is just arbitrary. And
yeah, so you don't think it matters the first click of the dimension? You don't think it has an impact?
We should have. Sorry, the whole point of this was to test that. So let's do that. So let's move. Let's pick the bottom one first and then the top one, and then assign the parameter X, and then let's just flex it. So technically, if the first one is the master, the bottom one's not going to move and the top one will in our experiment here. So let's just do a 1/2 foot and hit apply. Yeah, I'm not sure why it's choosing to move the bottom one. Let's reverse it just to be thorough. Maybe we have it reverse. So let's pick the top one first, then the bottom, and see if that affects anything. And then if we change this back to a foot,
It's
yeah, it's
still the
still
same
wanting to
thing.
move the bottom, but
I
there's
would
no real.
guess. I would guess it's the order of creation of the reference planes, perhaps.
Oh, that could be. That could
Uh-huh.
be the creation order. So,
I'll have to
but
test it. Yeah.
so right now the bottom one's the one that's moving. If you want to stop that behavior, you can just pin it, and
Hmm.
now it'll force the top one to move.
Yeah, sure. So pin the planes.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. That's why I've never run into this because
Hmm.
you would never leave something just floating in space and
Yeah,
let Revit
exactly.
decide what to do.
Yeah.
I constrain everything.
Yeah, a well-made family wouldn't have that issue in the first place.
Yeah.
Steph B asks, Brenton, do you have any insights to share for dealing with arrays in families? Okay, that's what we've talked about. And as many note, is sometimes either cause errors or create heavy models. So error, I guess we've talked about what happens if you have less than two array elements. What about heavy models? It's true that it can be a little slow, right?
Yeah, yeah. And one of the mistakes I made in my first set of cabinets that I sold was I would double nest families. And when
Mm-hmm.
you double nest, it takes significantly longer to
Mm-hmm.
update the family and it starts to get heavy. So yes, you do have to be careful. So these principles are great, but I use these principles sparingly. If I can find a better way to do it without having to nest, I will do it that way first. It's only when it's my last resort will I go to like a more extensive step.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Uh, John had the question about hosting using face-based families and hosting on the geometry. Want the shelf be set back from the face of the base cabinet, 3/4 of an inch?
Um, okay, let's look at it from the side. Yes, but that is what we wanted. So let me
Yeah,
put
exactly,
this.
right?
Yeah. So you can see here it is cut short 3/4 of an inch from the back, but we did that deliberately. If I was to remove that and just feed in the depth, you can see it would do that, and that's not what we want. So that's why we did what we did, if that makes sense. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, sure. All right. What other questions? I've got a comment from Robert who says he got your families. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But then Viviana says I put in properties of plane reference aside of the reference. So when I have to select with tab, appears the name that I need. So I think she's mentioning the fact that she
Oh.
gives names to reference planes. Do you do that as well, or?
Yes, key reference planes I do, top, bottom. Um, if they're not something I feel particularly strong about, I won't. But that is a good principle just because then you know what you're selecting. So she's talking about
Mm-hmm.
if you select a reference plane, you can come over here and you can name it. So I'm just going to name it shelf. If this is a bad name, I wouldn't recommend this name. But now when you hover over it, you can see it says plane shelf. So
Yeah,
it does
when you
help with
select it as well,
organization.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you use? I'm curious. Do you use a color sometimes for reference planes? I typically don't, except
Oh.
when I was making doors. I've used color red reference planes for the rough height and rough width. That's the only
Oh.
time I can remember I've used different colors.
I have never, but I could see where
Uh-huh.
that would be handy,
Mm-hmm.
actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got my mind going. I could have a whole color system depending on what I'm having the reference plane do.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Well, typically, I don't think it's necessary. When you have
Yeah,
lots of reference planes, I think it can be
yeah.
helpful.
Mhm.
Okay. Steph B asks, is it possible for a void to be placed on a visibility parameter so that it can be turned on and off only when applicable? It can, right?
Now it can. I'm still working in 2017, and I
Mm-hmm.
am my next upgrade to all my families. I think I'm moving everything over to 2021 because that's when you were finally able to turn a void on and off with. I can't remember. Let's just do it. I can't remember if it's called. Can't
I
remember
think
what
it's
it's
called
called.
cuts. It's only
Yeah,
says cut, something like that, and you
it
can
does what
cut
you're
around.
imagining, but it's not called visibility, I don't think.
Hmm.
Let's do extrude void. Let's just do a circle real quick. Um, oh, I should have
It's
done it the other way.
yeah, it's a nested element.
Yeah, okay.
I
Well,
think you can still access it, right?
yeah, bad example, but yeah, see this
Cuts
cut.
geometry, yeah.
So you can turn it on and off, and then you can associate it with a parameter you create so the user can turn it on and off. This would be so helpful now for my sinks because I put the sinks in the base cabinet, and to be able to tell it what that it can cut or not cut based on,
Hmm.
if the user wants a sink or not. Anyways, yeah.
Yeah, I do have another question. How, so you're saying you're working with Revit 2017. How do you decide which version you're using?
It's kind of arbitrary. I just kind of went back enough time that I don't think there's any users still on that platform. Um, and I think we're to the point where 2017 is old enough that I think I can safely upgrade to 2021. And like I said, the reason I'm doing 2021 is for literally for that voids. And
Yeah.
it's also when we get tabs because
Hmm.
2017 doesn't have tabbed views and it drives me nuts.
Yeah, yeah. 2019 was a big one with the tab views for sure.
Yeah.
And yeah, but I think even then Autodesk doesn't, uh, they only offer, you can only download up to 2020 right now. I think you can ask permission, like if you ask them, they will give you access to the older versions, but on the portal, it only goes to 2020. And they say they don't support the older versions. So I have a few clients that are using older version now. I'm like, guys, like the old versions are not supported anymore. You need to
Yeah.
update.
Yeah. I don't even know how you get older. I guess some of the older ones were standalone licenses, but now it's like I think you have to have the subscription
I
anyways. So
think, yeah, you need subscriptions anyway, but Autodesk, I think there's like on the portal you can see three versions, the current one
yeah.
plus three. But if you ask them, they might give you access to a couple more. And I've saw a blog post when I was doing research about this.
Yeah.
It can get maybe up to 2018, something like that. But like, I don't even think you can download 2017.
Yeah, that actually, now that you bring that up, that was another factor because I was gonna have an intern work on the
Hmm.
families, and I can't even get 2017 to have him work on them. So
Hmm.
like, I have to upgrade just because auto.
Uh, All right. The lunatic says chatting from okay, either the past, present, or future. As I decide to watch the beginning 15 minutes in. Yeah, so people during the live they can like just switch
Oh,
from one place of the stream to the other. Uh, Ryan asks, what are the two main things that slow down families?
as far as speed,
I
um,
guess so. Yeah.
I think I've only really noticed if you have a lot of parameters that are using other parameters to calculate, that I think makes it a little slow. And then, like I mentioned earlier, double nesting really tanks the performance. So nesting inside, like if you make a
Mm-hmm.
Russian like nesting doll out of the
Mm-hmm.
families, then it's not going to work very well.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it's also mostly too complex geometries with too many constraints, like some of the families from bimobject.com.
Oh,
I had one of their window, and it's like you just move it a little bit, and then it freezes for like
yeah,
10 seconds, even on my Alienware computer.
yeah,
So, and then you look, there's like 200 parameters.
yeah,
So a family like this, it's gonna be pretty slow. So like too precise for no reason. Like if you're gonna
yeah,
model something, there has to be a good reason for it. And also, I mean, you can always nest detail items if you want to have to use as detail in plan view, something like that. But when you're gonna model, you gotta think about how precise you want to be.
yeah. That's a big thing. Like, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? Like,
Hmm.
there are things that people are never going to change, so why make it a parameter?
Sure, sure. All right. Do you want to show your website, RevitFamily.biz?
Oh, yeah,
I
sure.
think there's a code as well, right?
Yes, and I can't remember what it is right now.
I
I
think
think it was
it's
like,
RP Beast.
yes, it was Revit Pure Beast. So RP Beast is, I think that's 20% off anything here. Yeah, so at RevitFamily.biz you can find all my families. I have a bunch of different styles of cabinets. So whether you want inset cabinets or overlay cabinets, and then in modern styles, traditional styles, all of that, shaker style. Then I do windows and exterior doors. These are all residential. They're geared towards residential, but the cabinets are still really good for commercial. I use them on my commercial jobs. So interior, exterior doors. The exterior doors have like, you can explore. They've got like garage doors, sliding doors, that good stuff. And then interior doors, and then railings is my newest lineup. And then you can get everything in bundles and save money. I've got a bunch of stuff still in the works, but I test things for a long time before I release them. And then even then, you're all going to find problems and write me about them. But I do listen to everyone's emails and I make regular updates. So also, as I mentioned before, you can go to the free download section and you can sample any of my cabinets before you buy them, or any of my models before you buy them. So you can kind of get a feel for what parameters are there. And then you can also find a couple freebies like the cheat sheet. People have requested the glass hatch family for some reason. Apparently it's hard to find. And then there's a residential door tag, which is actually a really complicated family to make. So I give that away free, just because the size changes, like the typical, if you're used to hand drafting and want it to look that way, it's actually kind of annoying to try to make. So that's on there.
Cool. Yeah, I did get your cheat sheet, and it's pretty good. It's pretty helpful. It's well made. Pretty good reminder. So yeah, the get these families and all the free content. It's RevitFamily.biz. That's right.
Yep.
Good.
Okay. Yeah, and I can give you all the links and the discount if you want to put it in the description so that people can use it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I do have RevitFamily.biz already in the description. Robin, do you have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Robin asks, how do you decide when it's worth creating a new family instead of trying to find and use an existing one?
That is a really good question.
Yeah, it is.
That's a balance I think we're all walking. For me, it depends on how many more times I'm going to use it probably, and how much time I think it's going to take me to make. So for cabinets, I use cabinets on every job, but that's when I started making my own families. I'm like, this is something that's going to take me a long time, but I'm going to use them every day after that. So I sat down and made me really good families. Because the ones out of the box they were horrible and they were hard to use when you were placing them. So for me, that's when I decided to do that. But then, and also it changes through stages. So for example, I was designing a house last month, and I just needed a dining room table because I was doing floor plans. So I just threw anything off of Revit City that would look good in floor plan, because that was the only place you're going to see it. But now we're moving into interior design, and I took the time to design make the exact table that we wanted to go in there, because now we're looking at it in 3D. So I needed more detail. So I built the family, even though I might not use it again, because it's a very specific table. So it really depends. For me, it's how often I'm going to use it is one way, or what do I need it to do might be another use case scenario. But in the case of making the specific family, I didn't take the time to make it parametric, because I'm not going to use it again. So it didn't take that long to build the table.
Yeah, that's something I tell beginners who are afraid of Revit family editors sometimes. I tell them, you don't have to make it parametric. It's okay to start with a very simple family. Especially sometimes my client will draw lines and use model groups for lines, like for repetitive elements. I tell them, I know you're scared of the family editor, but you can draw the lines inside of family editor. It's fine. At least it's in the right category. You can schedule it. It's much better than the lines and groups technique. I always start my presentation with that, saying it doesn't have to be parametric. I do have a follow-up question about that. Do you have when do you know when you have to start a family over, or if you can modify it?
I will spend, like, if I'm going to try to save time, and say I need a pool table, I'll go grab it off of Revit Family or Revit City. Well, that's a bad example. Pool tables are kind of a set size, but let's say the dining table. So I'll pull one off, I'll crack it open and look at the parameters and try to see what the person who made it was doing. If I can figure it out in 3 to 4 minutes what they did, I'll go with it. But if it takes me longer than like 10 minutes, I'm definitely just going to start from scratch, because in 10 minutes, I can usually do the same thing and get up to where they already were, depending on the complexity. I mean, it depends.
Yeah.
Like refrigerators, those are kind of annoying to make. So I've taken those and I edit those. But there are times where I get 30 minutes into something and realize this is just a trash heap. I can't do anything with this, and then I'll get out of there.
Yeah. Okay. Last chance, folks, to ask a question if you have something for Brenton. Yeah, I tend to agree with you. Sometimes if I cannot understand the family, I don't know what's going on, unless like it's an emergency. I need it done like within a couple of hours to get plans out. I will typically start over.
Yeah.
Yeah, especially since I'm more experienced now. When if it's family that was badly made from the start, it's almost impossible to modify the right way, I think.
Yeah.
All right. I think the show is coming to an end. Did you have anything else, something final to add about any final tip or something?
No, I think we've covered everything. I was going to go into type catalogs, but that was the last thing. But that is in depth, so we might not cover that.
Yeah, that was one of the bullet points that I had. But you know what? I think we could. I mean, we could do a whole session about type catalogs.
Yeah,
so you'll have to come back.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. That would be fun.
All right. So we have a message from Terry. Thank you so much for your time and efforts. So thanks to everybody for being there. So a couple of things before I'll leave you. Just 1 minute. Okay, so thanks again to AVAIL for sponsoring this season 4 of Revit Pure Live. Go to the link in this video description to try AVAIL. You even get a special discount just for you. If you have trouble managing your content, you don't know where to place your families, how to organize your detailed schedule libraries, you place everything inside your template, you use container files, AVAIL may be a good solution for you. And I'm very grateful for them for accepting to sponsor Revit Pure Live. And make sure to check out the Pro template, Revit Pure Pro template at revitpure.com/pro template. And of course, you can support Brenton at RevitFamily.biz and get a discount with code RPBeast. And yeah, I did forget to announce it. Next week episode will be with Benjamin Gluntz, who is the CEO at BIMsmith. BIMsmith has both what they call a marketplace, where you can download free manufacturers' content for Revit, and they also have a crafting tool where you can make system families such as roofs and ceilings and walls with multiple components. They have really good families, I would say. Really good families. And each year, I hope they do this year again, they have a winter Christmas family competition. Always fun. You have all sorts of crazy families. So I hope we get to talk about it with Ben. But tune in next week. This will be an afternoon show. It will be at 3 p.m. next Wednesday. What date is that? It's October 26th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Hoping to see you there. Back to you, Brenton. So thank you so much for coming in the show. That was super helpful.
Yeah,
I think everyone enjoyed. Everyone are saying thanks in the chat. So thanks, Brenton. And see you again, everybody, next week. Bye.
Yep.